Welcome to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. I am Evelyn Marcus.
And I am Phyllis Zimbler Miller.
In this episode, we talk with a brave Muslim human rights activist in Canada who speaks up loudly against Muslim anti-Semitism and is a real bridge builder with Israel and with the Jewish community. Raheel Raza is president of the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow, a leader at the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, an author and a journalist. Raheel, welcome. We are so thrilled to have you as our guest today to discuss important stuff in the current times with us.
Yes, and unfortunately, at an unfortunate time, but we have to ask these questions. So after October 7th, Hamas's brutal massacre of civilians, et cetera, how many Muslim organizations in Canada spoke up against Hamas's brutality?
You know, it's very sad indeed that our organization, the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism and Muslims Facing Tomorrow, were the only two organizations that immediately on October 7th condemned the Hamas attack. Our press release is on our website, and it's also unfortunate that some organizations did not comment on the issue when approached by journalists. There was hope that the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference, a conglomeration of 52 or 54 Muslim countries, should have put out a press release right away, but they did not.
And what is the background of that, Raheel? I mean, you can be pro-Palestinian and still respect all human rights.
Absolutely. This is not about being pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian. It is about being pro-Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, which promotes hate, which launched this horrific attack on October 7th. It was an attack not just on the civilian population of Israel, it was an attack on humanity. The brutality of the attack spoke for itself. And any human being should have stood up and said, this is wrong. Because we know morally and ethically the difference between what is good and bad, what is evil and what is not. And this was evil.
So what made these other Muslim organizations in Canada not speak up against those atrocities?
You know, when it comes to Israel, as you know very well, and I have learned through my years with work at the United Nations, there's always been a bias against Israel. And it's easy to blame Israel because no matter what happens in the world, let's blame Israel and the Jews. And this happens all the time. It's not something new. This attack, while it was extremely shocking, was not surprising because we have been seeing the writing on the wall, connecting the dots, and also at CMAA, at the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, which has now been in place since about 5 years, we have been warning that the rise in anti-Semitism is going to culminate in something terrible. And it did. But the rest of the Muslim world wants to sort of push it under the carpet, you know? And so no matter what happens, we know that the attack was launched by Hamas, but let's blame Israel. It just is the default. It has always been the default.
Right. You said you saw the writing on the wall. You connected the dots. Where do you get your information from?
Well, we track the extremists. You know, our work has been to expose the radical jihadists, to expose the extremists. Even before 9/11, we were doing this. You know, it doesn't come as that much of a surprise when the Western leaders don't listen to what we have to say. When people sort of put it aside as, you know, fear-mongering. That is what they used to say, fear-mongering. But no, it wasn't fear-mongering. It's an actual fact. What has been happening with Iran and its proxies, with the Muslim Brotherhood, with the jihadists, is something that we have been talking about and exposing for a very long time. And so connecting the dots was not difficult. All you have to do is track what the agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood in the West, to track the agenda of Iran and its proxies, the IRGC, which unfortunately has a very strong presence in Canada. And
What is the IRGC?
IRGC is the Islamic
Oh,
Revolutionary Guard.
right. I just realized. Okay.
Is,
Iranian Revolutionary
Revolutionary
Guard.
Guard of Iran. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And they are a very violent, very, very strong group of people. And they have a presence in North America as we speak. So we have been tracking and exposing these extremists, these jihadists for a very, very long time.
And Raheel, do our Western authorities track this as well? Are they aware of activities of Iran on our soil and activities of the Muslim Brotherhood on our soil?
It would be naive to say that if we know it and that they don't know. I believe they are aware. But, there are all sorts of political manifestations. There is the funding that is coming from these countries from outside of North America. There is the power, the control. There is their infiltration into our places of power where policies are made. And so I would say, yes, they are aware. Whether they did something about it or they are doing something about it is a whole different story.
Yeah. One of the issues we had in the Netherlands, where I'm originally from, and when I was still living there before 2006, was that the secret services and the policymakers started to scale back from monitoring all extremist activity and preparations, but they scaled back to only when it's preparing directly within the coming 6 months for violence. And that meant that a lot of preparation, a lot of indoctrination, a lot of infiltration could go on without being monitored because it was not directly leading to violence. But on the longer term, it is.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And we have been saying this for a long time, that this is not just about overt violence. This is an ideology. It is a mindset. The jihadist ideology has to be understood. And I'm not going to say that it's easy, but we are here to help non-Muslims understand, to help our policymakers, to help our leaders understand, because as Muslims, that there is a lot that we can say and expose without being slapped with a label of Islamophobia or bigotry or racism, which is why it is incumbent on Muslims to stand up and speak out. This is something that is happening within our faith, within our communities. The faith has been subverted, it has been hijacked, it is misused for purposes of violence. And so we have been warning that this is an ideology. It is not a war of weapons. It is an ideological war. And only and if the leaders and policymakers and lawmakers understand the mindset of the jihadist, will they ever be able to deal with the situation? The infiltration, a lot of it is very subtle. After 9/11, the extremists also became very clever. There weren't that many violent physical outbursts and attacks. It is all very subtle. It happens under the table. It happens through infiltration, through money is coming in. That Qatar is funding so many of our educational institutions. Why is that being allowed? Why is foreign money being allowed into our countries? Because it's not always going towards education, as you and I know.
Right. So a lot of what we see on campuses after October 7, the anti-Semitism, the anti-Israelism has big part to do with foreign
Funding.
money coming from Qatar, which
And
is
Iran, yes,
and Iran.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
yes,
it's
you're right.
amazing. We're very grateful to you that you educate the non-Muslim community in the West about the extremist tactics and ideology of coming from your community, your wider community, because in the West we tend not to understand it.
You know, one of our mandates is the 3 E's. We say we must educate the masses, we must um, empower for change, and eliminate the problem. But until you understand the problem, you can't really do much to eradicate it. And this
Absolutely.
is why the hate continues to grow. This is why the anti Semitism continues to grow. Anti Semitism is not a new phenomenon, it has been there for ages. It is now, today, it is just a new form of anti Semitism, and it is virulent. It is growing at a rate that we can't even comprehend. And it is a very dangerous trajectory because anti Semitism is based on hate. And as you know, there is a famous saying what starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews. This is something
Exactly.
that come back to bite all of us. So it is a global scourge, it is a global virus. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what your faith or your politics are. We have to all together fight the virus of hate, which leads to all these issues.
Absolutely.
So the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, your organization, organized an event 2-3 weeks ago. Could you tell us about it? What the event was about? What happened? What were the highlights? Who were there?
Yes, yes. Evelyn, it was a remarkable event. I don't think there has been an event like this anywhere in the world. And I say this, very humbly, because this event was to expose the denial, the deception, and the destruction caused by the Hamas agitators. And they had, of course, a well-crafted agenda that they wanted to deceive the public. And this event was on March 3rd. We had over 400 people attend at a very, very excellent venue in Midtown Toronto. It was a diverse audience. There were Muslims, Jews, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, atheists. It was really, really well attended, a diverse group of people. But the highlight of this program, its special sort of agenda was the fact that these were Muslim speakers. It was called Women on the Front Lines. And the reason we called it Women on the Front Lines is because we specifically wanted to address the sexual violence that took place on October 7th, which, of course, the world has been in denial about. And it was really important as women and as Muslim women specifically that we take this on and we speak about it. So the speakers who came were from diverse backgrounds. They have their own organizations. They were here from from America, from Canada, and from the United Kingdom. And they were from diverse backgrounds. Sri Lankan Muslim, Syrian Muslim, Iraqi Muslim, Pakistani Muslim, Indian Muslim. So they were not a monolith, but the messaging was the same, which is what was remarkable. They all spoke from the heart. They came and they spoke because they really care about this cause. They very clearly put everything into perspective. And I think that this was a very important message for the audience to listen to, that these are Muslims and they are saying exactly what happened and why it was so wrong and why it's so important for everyone to stand up and speak out.
So what was the reaction from other Muslim organizations when you had this conference?
It was encouraging that there were many Muslims at the event, but at the same time, I will be honest and say that it's discouraging that many Muslims are so brainwashed by the pro-Hamas narrative and the Iran proxy narratives that they can't think beyond that. The response from the people who came was tremendous. In fact, it's still coming in. People are writing in to say, we have never attended an event like this. We feel empowered that there are Muslim voices speaking out for us. The Jewish community, which has been feeling isolated, they're scared, especially in Toronto, where violence on the streets has been unbelievable. So for them to hear a message of solidarity, to hear a message that says, we understand, we are here with you, we will support you, and we will speak out when you can't. And this is where I'd like to critique, I need to take a moment to critique Israel and the Jewish community living here. Although they are on the right side of history, they have failed to build up a strong narrative. They have failed to build up a strong counter narrative. And again, this is not something that I haven't said before. I have often told my Jewish friends in the community that I work with that you really suck at PR.
Yes.
you know,
Yes,
the
we're not going to disagree with you.
there is of course ample proof about what happened. We had at our conference on March 3rd an expert from the UN and on sexual violence, Professor Ruth Halperin Kadari, who was brilliant in laying out the facts. It was actually very difficult for many of us to listen to the facts, but this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to lay out the facts, as gory as they may be, so that people can absorb and understand the level of depravity and brutality that took place on October 7th, is specifically in relation to the rape of women. So what the Jewish community needs is a narrative that is not just reactive and putting out fires. They need a proactive narrative. Otherwise, it will not receive the desired results. We as people outside of the Jewish community can speak and lobby and be activists, till the cows come home, but we have to work together.
Yes, we totally agree with you. And um, we also discussed this with somebody who was a parliamentarian before in Israel. Recently, we had that episode with Ruth Wasserman Lande, and she agreed too. Israel is not strong enough in bringing the facts out and let the facts be heard by the wider global audience. Not as strong in doing that as the Palestinians are. They do, yeah.
The pro-Hamas people immediately changed the narrative. They attacked the civilian population of Israel on October 7th. On October 8th, they became the victims.
Yeah.
They changed the narrative.
Yeah.
First, it was an Israel-Palestinian conflict. Then they made it into a Jewish-Muslim conflict. And this is extremely troubling. It is not a Jewish-Muslim conflict. It is not a conflict of religions. This is something that is an ideological war. But they had planned their narrative years in advance. They pumped billions of dollars into their social media, into their media, outreach, into their narrative. It is not possible to fight that until we understand that we have to have a stronger counter narrative. And that's what we are trying to create. But it has to be done in collaboration with everyone who is involved.
Yes, and we agree with that so much. So since October 7, we saw outbursts of anti-Semitism in massive anti-Israel demonstrations. You said there was violence in Toronto. We've seen it in demonstrations in London, Australia, the US. Large parts of these crowds are Muslims. living in these countries. What role does Iran have? What role does Iran have in anti-Israel rallies, in these rallies in the Western world?
You know, the Hamas attack of October 7th and the agenda that followed, which is these demonstrations, was very well crafted and planned by Iran and its proxies like the Muslim Brotherhood. This is not something that just happened as a coincidence. Oh, people came out on the streets to lobby. You know, we live in a free world, we live in a democracy, so everyone has a right to rally and to be activists and to lobby in the streets. What they don't have a right, I believe, is to promote hate. So these rallies were very little about Palestine or the rights of the Palestinians, which of course we agree that they need to have. These were rallies of hate against Israel and the Jewish population. These were rallies that were calling for death of the Jews. How is it that our lawmakers and our policymakers and our leaders have been allowing this to happen? It is inconceivable. You know, even in a country like Pakistan, where I'm from, they actually put a ban on pro Hamas rallies in sports stadiums. And it makes you think that there is something wrong when pro Hamas demonstrators screaming hate against the Jews are allowed to run freely in the streets of Toronto. In Toronto, businesses, Jewish businesses were targeted. In Toronto, Jewish homes were targeted. Synagogues were targeted. Once again, the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism came to the fray. We actually wrote letters of support to the Jewish businesses that had been targeted. We took groups of Muslims there to show them solidarity and support, because that is the least we can do. You know, to say that we are with you. It is terrifying for people who are visibly prominent as Jewish, and especially the young people in educational institutions. They are so terrified that they hide their identity. And that is not something that that should be allowed to happen in a liberal democracy.
No, and it's not the same, but it sounds very much like the 1930s and 40s.
Yes, because again, when the masses don't speak out, it seems that you're giving carte blanche. And we know through news reports and through intel that some of these demonstrators were paid. So where was this money coming from? Once again, Iran is the culprit. So, you know, the fact that they have their proxies here in North America, especially in Canada, makes it very clear that they have such a big hand in this. So this was an agenda. This was a very, very long pre-planned agenda. And it started playing out after October 7th. They immediately changed the narrative. And it's very unfortunate that because their narrative is so strong and because it is on social media, that ordinary people, Muslims and non-Muslims, buy into that. They get brainwashed by it.
So if we want to share this important information you are giving us here, do you have open sources we could refer to that form evidence that Iran is involved in organizing this and the Muslim Brotherhood is?
We should be able to send you something.
Okay.
Because it has been exposed. I mean, this is not just an opinion that I'm offering. It has been openly exposed. One of our major newspapers here, the National Post, for which I write very regularly on a daily basis, exposes all these issues. And the issue of foreign funding coming from Qatar and Iran into Canada is open knowledge. It's not a hidden secret. And they are so brazen that they don't even want to hide it.
Yeah.
Many of the universities, the top universities in the United States, have Middle Eastern departments that are funded legally by foreign money. And I think that Americans I can't speak for Canadians, just don't want to think about it. They don't want to think what that first teeny step to the next step, just don't want to know about it.
You have really nailed it here, because this is what we have been saying. You have to connect the dots. It's not one thing that stands alone. You know, if we look at the Hamas attack of October 7th, yes, it was brutal, it was terrible, but it's not a standalone event. It's an agenda that has been in the planning for a long time. So we have to connect the dots. If it happened there, could it happen here? So these are the important questions that North Americans, Canadians, and Americans have to ask themselves. And they have to connect the dots. They have to look at the underlying ideology. They have to look at the infiltration. They have to look at the funding that is coming in, because nothing is standalone. They are too clever for it to be something that could make it illegal in the countries that they live. They stay under the radar. You know, they only push as far as they can, and they know all the loops, and they know how to work the system. And it's unfortunate that the system doesn't catch the loopholes.
And I just want to say, because here in Beverly Hills, I was part of a grassroots meeting yesterday about how to make Beverly Hills a hate-free zone. And a lot of our ideas can't go forward because of freedom of expression laws. I'm not talking against freedom of expression. I'm just saying that we're really held tightly by allowing freedoms, but how do we protect others? It's really complicated.
It is very complicated. It is very complicated, and this freedom of expression issue is a complicated issue. But what we have to remember is that the other side, the extremists, the jihadists, Hamas, they know how far they can go within the system. Try doing some of what they're doing here in Muslim countries. You know, try doing it in the countries where they live. They would never be allowed to have a rally like this in Saudi Arabia. But they use our freedoms to their benefit. This is why they thrive in Western democracies, because they use the system in their favor. You understand how
Exactly.
they work the system. They work the system. So, you know, there is a beautiful Sufi saying, I'm a Sufi at heart. And there is a beautiful Sufi saying that is that you have to learn to play the game their way. And this
Yes.
is what? It's no longer about being nice to people, because that's, you know, not on the agenda. Yes, we want peace. We love our fellow human beings. We have to care for each other. But we have to be clever. We have to be strategic. We have to learn, we have to see what they're doing, understand their ideology, and then work against it.
For those who want to take a deeper dive, I could recommend, and Raheel, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a document. It's about 25 years old now, I think, written by the Muslim Brotherhood in America, and it was found in a raid on one of the archives in Northern Virginia of the Muslim Brotherhood in America, and it's called the 10-year plan for North America, an explanatory memorandum. There is explained that the method for the coming decade was not violent jihad, but cultural jihad. Right? Which means softening the minds of the Westerners towards Islam in general, and then using that space to implement more to implement tolerance for more extremist Islam.
You're
Is that
absolutely right. If anyone would even look at the agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood or read the Hamas charter,
Mhm.
they would never have any doubt in their mind about what they are planning to do. It is so clear. And as I said, they're not even ashamed to have it out in the open. You know, they are so confident in their ability to work in the West because we have been the enablers. We have enabled them to move on with their agendas by not being harsh enough, by not being clever enough. So they are very clear in their agenda. And anyone who understands their agenda will know exactly what they have set out to do. And they're succeeding
Yes.
faster than we can catch up with them.
To be fair, though, the percentage, as I heard Ilan Levy on a program, one of the Israeli spokespeople talk about, there's a huge different number of people, Muslims, radical Islamists, who can use social media as opposed to Jews. So in fairness, that's why we need to be doubly or triply clever because of the numbers.
Oh, absolutely. And, talking about numbers, there's a fantastic short documentary called By the Numbers. This was made by the Clarion Project, who I worked with till about 5-6 years ago. And it is so clear because it gives you exactly the circles of numbers about the violent jihadists and the non-violent jihadists. And it tells you it was based on a Pew poll research. It's called By the Numbers. And it just clarifies so much because it speaks about the silent majority. It speaks about the ideology. It speaks to the mindset. And there is absolutely no doubt left in your mind once you've seen that. The numbers probably have increased since then, but that is something that very clearly tells you what we are up against. And once you understand who the enemy is, then you can proactively work towards fighting that. Well, fighting not in a physical way, but to exposing the enemy.
Evelyn, do you want to ask more questions?
No, you have the last one.
Okay, so what can our listeners do to strengthen and support your voice of peace and fruitful relations between Muslims and Jews? What can we do? Not just talk about, but do.
Yes, I'm very much about the do. I'm very much about what we can do to bring about change. I think there needs to be a very urgent dialogue and discussion between Jews and Muslims. We, especially after 7th October, the two communities have gone into their silos, for different reasons. And to some extent, that is understandable. But even before October 7th, we at the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism worked at bringing Jews and Muslims together. Last year on Eid, we held an event which was a celebration of Eid and a recognition of Yom HaShoah. People said it's not possible. We made it possible. We had about 200 people attending, Muslims and Jews. We continuously try to create dialogue between Jews and Muslims, especially among the youth. So my son, who owns a restaurant, came up with an idea, breaking bread for peace. We are planning to bring together Jewish and Muslim youth to cook together. Yes. So, it is very important that we look upon each other as human beings. People ask me, why are you so concerned about the sexual violence of October 7th? It was not your community. But I'm a mother. I'm a grandmother. I'm a woman. You would have to be inhuman not to be concerned about what happened. And we have to talk about the issues no matter how difficult they are. It doesn't mean that we always have to agree with each other, but we need to listen to each other. We need to sit down and listen to each other. And this is not happening. So I think for the communities, it's really important to come together, to have a common message, which is that we will not allow hate to penetrate our streets. We will not allow hate to be part of the agenda in the countries where we live. While the conflict is going on in the Middle East, it doesn't matter which side you're on. We want peace, and we want to be able to live with each other in harmony. There has to be trust and confidence. How do we build up that trust and confidence? Is by talking to each other, by listening to each other. And to me, at the moment, that is the most important thing, is to spend time. Since October 7th, there has not been a single day when we have not been involved in some sort of conversation with the Jewish community, mostly to show that we are in solidarity with them. We understand their pain. They are our brothers and sisters in humanity, if not in faith, but also to create those bridges that have fallen apart. And so we really need to rebuild those bridges of understanding. And that is how we'll move forward together. Because as I said in the beginning, and I'll say again, this is not just your battle or my battle. This is our battle for a
And
better
that
future,
is
for a better world.
so wonderful to hear and so important to agree with. At the same time, we see in Europe and in the United States and probably also in Canada that those dialogues are often the Muslim dialogue partners, interfaith dialogue partners, are often affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. In other words, they are Islamists and they sympathize with Hamas. Even if they say something else, if you dig into it, then that's the case. So that is not the right dialogue partner. You're never going to convince them or make them understand anything. They use the dialogue for their own agenda. So many people want this dialogue, but I think we should all, if we take steps to organize one, we should all approach you, Raheel, and ask your advice who to have as a dialogue partner. Maybe we can have people from your organization, maybe people in our countries, who to turn to and who not to turn to. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that, but it's also important to remember, Evelyn, that there is a large percent of Muslims who are not mosque-going Muslims, who have, who are sort of on the shelf, so to speak,
Yeah.
and they are the Muslims that we have to reach out to.
Yes.
They can be influenced by the other narrative, but hey, let's have a better narrative. You know, eventually, if you look at human beings, everybody wants peace. Everyone wants to have a job 9 to 5. They want to give a good education to their children. They don't veer towards hatred and conflict as a default. And so we have to touch that part of their humanity, which says that we are all human beings and we need to reach out to each other. So, yes, you're absolutely right. There are some people who we know are red flags, and, we definitely don't want to engage in a dialogue with them because for them, the dialogue is always about conflict and politics and never about humanity and peace. But there are thousands of others who are open to that dialogue. We just have to find ways to reach them. It's not an easy journey. It is a challenge every single day. We have challenges with our own community, condemning us for supporting Israel and the Jewish people. But that's a very small drop in the ocean of the work that has to be done. It's not about my being popular. I gave that up when I turned 50. It's about being able to sleep at night. It's about my conscience and my ethics and my morals, which say that, my tagline is a line from the Quran that says humanity is one community. And I follow that to the T, that we have to be humane in our outreach. And sometimes we may have to listen to the other side, even when we don't agree with the rhetoric. And it may be difficult, but these are the people whose minds we have to change. So we can't avoid dialogue with them. We just have to make sure that it's the right kind of dialogue.
I like that, the right kind of dialogue. And as we close, we give you a chance. Is there anything you want to say it's really close to your heart that we haven't had an opportunity to say?
I think we've talked about everything. Our mandate at the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism is a line that says building a wall against hate. And if we all take that up as a cause to build a wall against hate, I think we will be able to do this because, we work in many different communities to stop hate, to make sure that violence, which is a result of hate, is not happening. And for the future of our children and grandchildren in these wonderful countries that we live in that have given us the freedom to be who we are. And I, as a Muslim woman, am really respectful of this. And I appreciate it every day of my life. And I will continue to work towards this peace and understanding, and everyone is entitled to then do what they think that they can do. But every individual can make a change, one heart at a time.
Absolutely. One heart, one step at a time. We thank you for really this compelling talk. We thank our listeners for listening. Those of you who want to know more about Evelyn and myself and our work, go to Never Again Is Now podcast at YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And as we end every episode, we say, please speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.